Hello and welcome to Metro Home Theater Tech Tips. I'm Brent McCall.
I'm Adam Rogers.
And we are extreme social distancing today.
Yes, we are. So Brent, as everyone can see, Brent's on he's actually back here on a laptop, but I've got them all linked up in here. You guys will see him on the screen over in this area over here. But we are extreme social distancing today. Brent, you are at your home in front of your projector screen, and I am here at the office. So
yeah. Yes, sadly, due to a exposure more than 2 weeks ago,
Please be sure you are washing your hands
there it is.
your department while maintaining
So due to an exposure 2 weeks ago,
Thank you.
over 2 weeks ago,
and a second COVID test because of an inconclusive result on the first one, I am still incommunicado and not allowed.
right.
So, what is our sponsor today, Adam?
So today's sponsor is brought to you by the letter D. The D stands for distribution. So it's kind of an interesting setup for us today because last week we talked about the basic HDMI distribution. This week we're talking about the advanced HDMI distribution. And so the letter D is brought to you by distribution. And so well, one of the things that we talk about today will be the matrixing actually that we have for us here. So for instance, this one here, this is the CS-44M. CS-44M HDBTS. Now, the reason why that's important, I'm actually going to switch this over here to the top-down screen, if I can hit the right button here. There we are. So the reason why this is important, the 44M is the HDBTS, is because this is actually an HDBaseT model. So you'll notice here at the outputs, you not only have an HDMI output, but you also have an HDBaseT output. Now, Brent, why do we have two, and what do they do when they're on the same connection?
And this was an absolute problem solver for one of our tech calls this week, Adam.
Yes, it was, which we're going to talk about today, actually.
The really nice thing about having the parallel or dual ports for each output, if you have an older AVR, for example, that might not be fully 4K compatible, you would put that locally to the rack on the HDMI output and your 4K display on the HDBaseT output.
Right. And so at that, you have all the connections and everything you need right there for it. And you can also have something like a connection that's further away at the TV. You can use the HDBaseT. But then if you have an AVR inside the rack where the matrix is, you can just simply loop out the HDMI output and go into your AVR.
And we've also got a digital coax output for even older AVRs.
Yeah, exactly. And we even have a left-right audio output. Now, this does not do the down mixing, but if you have your source device set to stereo PCM, you can output analog audio into a matrix, maybe an audio matrix, or like you said, an older AVR at that point. So
that makes it really simple.
Yes, it does. So that's kind of what's going on with that. Did I get rid of you? There you are, you're back.
When we're looking at distribution,
yes,
there's a couple of things we do have to look at. Distance, resolution, feature sets, audio, and how many devices are at the end of the line.
Right. So with all that, real quick, I just want to jump in here real quick and say, again, everybody who's checking in with the live stream today, thank you so very much. As always, if you have any questions or comments, or if you have any ideas for us, put them in the chat. I have the chat here going with us today. We'll bring that up while we're talking about today. If it has nothing to do with today's topic, we want to hear from you. If you're viewing this after the fact and you're looking at the recorded episode, at that point, still put your comments and questions and any ideas you have down in the comment section below. We do monitor those. And a like, a subscribe, and a share would be wonderful. I can say that as of yesterday, I haven't checked it yet today, but as of yesterday, we were at 899 subscribers. We were one away. So we're waiting for that final one. So if you guys can go ahead and share it out to anybody who you think that these videos will help, and have them subscribe. We're looking to hit 1,000 subscribers as soon as we can, and so we'll just keep on going forward with that. So again, thank you everybody who has subscribed. If you're watching this video, if we've helped you out in some way, give us that like on that. Hit that subscribe button, hit the little bell notification to let you know when we come out with new videos and when we go live. So, back to distribution, Brent.
Before, I would like to give a shout out to Jesus in Texas.
Yes.
A regular viewer of our videos called us this week with a question.
Yep.
And we had a wonderful Zoom conference and quite educational for all of us, I think.
Yes, it was. So it actually worked out really well because his topic was actually fed directly into what we're talking about today, because last week we really talked about how to get video distribution or HDMI distribution on a basic level. So we had switches, we had splitters, we had extenders that we talked about, and those all worked very well together to distribute video however you need it. Now, of course, there's some limitations with that. With the switching, you only have one display. With the splitting, you only have one source. With the extender, it's still an extender, and that still works out really just fine. However, what you run into, of course, is that maybe you don't need to go very far with some of it. Maybe you need to go further with some of it. Maybe you need to do, maybe you have more than one TV that you want to have more sources on. Maybe you have more than one source that you want on more TVs. So that's where we jump into the advanced distribution. But in more cases, what Jesus was actually talking about specifically was that he had odd placements for the source devices. And so we want to talk about that today. So when we talk about advanced distribution, the matrix is really the starting point. Brent, talk to us about some of the ideas for matrixing and how exactly we want those to play into distribution.
Well, honestly, when you look at a matrix, the closest analogy I can give you, it is the nervous system.
Yes.
It is not a control point, because hopefully if you're getting into a matrix, you have some level of control system. And with ours, you have the ability to do IP, serial, or IR control.
Correct.
So there's a tremendous amount of flexibility there. But you also want to, and one of the things that Adam and I both push, is to lay your system out, preferably on a whiteboard in your shop so you can move things around easily. But you need to know what and where you're going and the feature sets that are going to be required. That gives you some idea of what final matrix you're going to need or what level of distribution. Do you need a 4x4, an 8x8? Do you need to go beyond that? Do you need to split out audio? Do you need to track audio on the input? There's a lot of things to consider with advanced HDMI distribution. One of the nice things that when you guys can call us is both Adam and I do have whiteboards by our desk. So we'll put you on speakerphone. We lay these things out in front of us so we have an idea what's going on, and we can help get the system laid out correctly and efficiently so you're not standing around kind of figure out what you're doing. Matrix is without a question the center point of your distribution.
Right.
Now, when you look at ours, you've got a full 18 gig capability. That means it will support anything within the HDMI 2.0 specification except eARC.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and
I don't know of any that does yet.
Yeah, and a lot of that's just because how do you route that? How do you send that back to wherever it needs to go? It's very difficult for it to be sent, to have all that matrixed as well as the video matrix. There's just a lot going on. So with all that,
it's a lot to ask for today.
Exactly, yes. And so as we move forward into the future, we may see those start to come out again. And if those are things that you're looking for us personally, or for me personally, I'd really want to see eARC and ARC become a much more stable platform before we see any of that happening on a matrix.
I'm sorry,
and you're
was
gonna
I
laugh about
laughing?
it. Yeah, right? So with that said, I want to give just a quick overview of what we talked about last time, and we'll be really quick about this. So I'm going to switch us back over here to the other screen, and I think if I do this, there you are. Brent, you're still on there. You're up here in this area. So
yes, sir.
Here's what we have. So this is just a basic splitter. So with an HDMI splitter, we're going to take our source, go into the splitter. This, of course, is a 1x4, so to speak. So we're going to go out to those 4 sources. Now, the thing is that let's say I don't want to do that because I only have, maybe we're using an extender with this of some kind, right? So we're going to extend that over that distance for that. The problem is that I only have one Cat5 cable going to that location, or I only have one HDMI cable going to one of these TVs. So the problem that we run into is that now I want multiple sources to go down that one connection. So the fix for that is pretty straightforward. We'll go ahead and we'll put, instead of a splitter, we'll put a switch. Okay, well that's great. So now we've got our other sources in here, like so. Let's say this is a 3x1, but the problem is that it's a 3x1. So now we just lost these connections to those TVs. So yes, I can switch through all these different connections here, and I can go to that TV, and that's well and good, down one cable. But the problem that we have is that I have 4 TVs. So because I have these 4 TVs, I need to ensure that I have connections to all 4 of those TVs. So instead, that's where the matrixing comes in. Now, the idea of a matrix, it does not, in fact, come from the movie The Matrix. Sorry, bad joke. That's where you're supposed to laugh, Brent. But instead, it actually comes from a terminology where you have a grid pattern of some kind. It actually looks very similar to an Excel spreadsheet, and when you look at it in this fashion, so you have your inputs, you have your outputs, and they intersect at certain areas on that matrix, and so you're able to then control what is going where on those connections. And so that's where the idea of a matrix comes in. If you look at any of those big algorithms and everything else that they'll do up on the blackboards and stuff in the movies and whatnot, a lot of times you'll see a matrix or something like that where they've drawn it out, or they might have a number going down like so with something else going out that way. So all that to say, that's the idea of where the idea of a matrix comes from. Now, what does it do? Very simply, we're going to take source 1, 2, or 3, and we're going to display any of those sources on any of 1, 2, 3, or 4 TVs in any combination. I might want to have source 1 on all 4 TVs. Might want to have source 1 and 2 over here and source 1 and 2 over here. I may want to have a mixture of everything. So I might have 1 to 1, 2 to 2, 3 to 3, and 4 to 4. I might have 1 to 4, 3 to 1, however it's going to play out. So that's the idea of what a matrix is. Now, it really comes down to the implementation. Where does everything go? So, with that said, let's talk about the setup for it. So, Brent, our friend Jesus, he called us up.
Yes.
And he did not have a matrix in place. We actually recommended a matrix to him because he was having multiple sources in his setup.
Four AVRs.
Yep.
4 displays, several sources local to the equipment location, and 1 source remote from the equipment location.
Right. So when we look at his setup,
And with feedback, he wanted audio back.
and he wanted audio back because the smart TVs were actually using the audio back to the source. So in his implementation, it actually worked out very well to have the matrix in place. So when you want to do matrixing, the benefit that you get from matrixing is, of course, that I can have any source on any of the TVs. I don't have to have separate sources for each TV, which means that you can do some really cool programming with control systems that maybe the video will follow where that person is. You know, even something as simple as pushing a button to continue to watch it somewhere else. You can get as advanced as doing something as like a motion sensor that says, you know, it counts the number of people that are in a certain room, and as they leave that room and go into another room, it just automatically turns on that TV to that source that they were watching. You can get some pretty advanced stuff with it, but that's what the matrices really allow you to do, because you're giving it the capability of viewing on any display that's hooked up to the matrix to view any source that's also hooked up to the matrix. So when you're looking at the layout, so I'm going to draw something else here. And Brent, can you describe how he had what the floor plan for his situation looked like?
Essentially, the house is built in an H pattern. You had 2 long wings in the center of the house. The center of the house is like the crossbar of the H. On the east side H, he had an office and I think a master bedroom. On the left side of the H, he had some bedrooms and the master suite. And in the middle of the H, he had the living room, and below that, the theater. So he had 4 primary display areas, 4 AVRs, 1 to the office, 1 to the living room, 1 to the theater, 1 to the master suite. And then he also had distributed audio to the patio. But he was doing that over the vessel system.
Which is a great system, by the way. We really like seeing those things. They work really, really well. And we'll talk about, we talked about that before, so you can go back and watch those videos.
And there's, as we get toward the end of today's episode, we're also going to talk about getting audio from the TV back to the AVRs, because that's something to consider as well when designing these systems if you're not using ARC.
Right. So,
which you should not be using ARC.
So in his setup, the way that he had everything was that he had all of the AVRs inside the closet over here. So it was very simple for him to have everything in one location. So that's our head in. That's where everything goes. Now, in his situation, his client originally was just going to have all of the smart apps on all the TVs, and he was just going to use the smart apps for any kind of video watching he wanted to do. But of course, as things go, clients many times will add in one extra thing. So he says, well, can we get the cameras from the surveillance system on the TV screens? Well, yes, you can. It just, we're adding more functionality to it. The other thing that he wanted to have a Bluray player added to it. So as soon as you add in some more devices like this, in his situation, he very easily could have just done a simple splitter. He would have two splitters. He would go from the surveillance system into a splitter, a four-way splitter. Then he would also go from the Blu-ray player into a four-way splitter into the AVRs. Now, in that situation, it's really straightforward because the AVRs handle all of the switching and everything else. But as he was adding more devices and more solutions to this,
Cable boxes,
Rokus, whatever else it may be, which he was doing all of the streaming through the local TVs in each space. However, in our eyes, a lot of times it's best to have a centralized streaming device of some kind. That way everything is done through that. As Brent, you and I know that on the projects that we've worked on. Yes,
because it's much easier for them to track the channels and for it to follow them than to, hopefully it's going to sync up at the same point on all the sets.
Exactly. So what he has going on also is that originally he was going to say, well, let's just put the Blu-ray player here inside the living room. And what we'll do is we'll just send that video information back to the closet. And that's all well and good, and that works just fine, because a lot of times what you have is that they want to have the Blu-ray player in a central location where it's easy to get to, and they don't have to worry about going in and changing a disc out in a closet or in a room that's all the way at the other side of the house. In this case, it actually worked out really well to where he could move it back into the closet, because the closet was actually more centralized than even the living room was. And so it worked out in his favor to have it in that position. But some people will have it all the way over in the office. Now, the fix for this, of course, when you have something all the way over there, wires. Run extra wires. Now, Brent, do you remember how many he ran in his installation?
Yes. He ran 3 Cat 6s and a coax to every location.
And why do we like that so much?
Because you can never have too many pieces of wire, because Cat 6 can be video, audio through our balance, which we had 2 weeks ago.
Yep.
Data, control, Ethernet.
Yep.
IR. The coax can be audio, which we discussed 2 weeks ago.
Yep.
IR.
Yep.
Or an RF modulated feed if you need it.
Yep.
So there's a lot. Or power.
Yeah, or power. You can do PoE power. You could do, you can do networking at that location. You can do anything you need to do at the location.
Mocha.
So, Mocha, you do as much as you possibly can to run the extra wire. The saying goes, copper's cheap. The thing is that if after the fact, after everything was already built here, if the client then said, hey, I want to have a Blu-ray player in the office, but I want all the audio to go back to the AVR, and it was never set up that way, and he only had that one connection, yes, we have a solution, because we have our the UKA-70 extender, which of course will give you that ability to send Toslink audio back to the source. However, if you don't have that's extra money for it. It's extra headache to find the solution for that. The good thing is that we have the solution, but you're putting yourself in a position to where you have to find that solution. Instead, put yourself ahead of it, run the extra wire.
And in the case of Jesus, the finalized plan was not where they started, but he was very cognizant of the potential for things to change, so he got the wires in place.
Correct. Yeah, he actually went ahead. I think he may have even run it without the consent, quote unquote, of the client. Which honestly, be mindful of doing something like that, because you're just doing it for yourself at that point. If they never hire you back in to do any other work, you've just spent the extra money to do that. But if you know for a fact that you're going to be the one who comes in after the fact to do extra stuff, and you think this client may do something later on, maybe do yourself a favor, run that extra wire.
I can tell you, it's already saved you and I on a job.
Yes, it has, very much so. So when we look at the distribution in his scenario, it's very straightforward. And when you really break it down and look at it, all you're doing, you're still keeping the same input, switching, extending display. You still have that same setup. It's just the route that you're going. So you're going back from the source, you're actually going back from wherever the room with the TV is, back to the switching area, doing all of your switching and configuring there, do anything kind of like the audio breakouts or anything else that you have to do there. And then now you're sending it back to the display at that point. So you still want to lay out, Brent, you were talking about before, that it's still a good idea to lay everything out ahead of time and plan everything. Just that way you know for a fact that I need to have my input cable that goes from that room back to the rack, and I need my output cable to go back to that room. And it just makes a big difference when you do all of your planning.
Yeah, laying stuff out on paper is absolutely, in my opinion, mandatory to know what you're going to be doing at the end and what routing process you're going to use.
Correct.
In fact, the notes that Jesus sent back and forth with us in email were incredible.
They were, yeah, and it was really great because he was very organized, and that's a big part of it, staying organized whenever you're doing any kind of planning. He was a new integrator. It was something that he had done as a quote-unquote hobby up until a
Which
little while
many
ago.
of us started as.
It does, yeah, but then he had somebody offer to pay him to do it, and off he went with it, and that's wonderful. But the good thing is that the path to success when it comes to something like that really is planning, staying ahead of your designs, and making sure that you have everything where you need it to be at, and make sure you can control everything you need to control. You're good. So with that being said,
who is that?
We have it's our repair guys. They're good. So we actually have a comment from the experts. He says sometimes you have to use ARC. Toslink does not support Dolby Atmos. So,
that is absolutely true.
and actually,
And
ARC doesn't support Dolby Atmos.
ARC does not, eARC does.
eARC does, correct.
And right now, to the best of my knowledge, I could be wrong, to the best of my knowledge, eARC is not supported on extenders yet.
Yet. So stay tuned, of course.
And I do quantify that with yet.
Yeah, it's a very big yet. Again, stay tuned as we
You
come up
can
with
do
new products and
eARC
stuff.
on an HDMI cable. The advantage of eARC is obviously object-based surround sound versus speaker-based surround sound,
Yeah.
which we covered 3 weeks ago.
It's been a little while for sure. We may want to cover that again, and as eARC becomes more prevalent. So when it comes to the advanced distribution, it really comes down to how are you going to get that stuff there. Brent, let's talk about, I'm going to throw this one at you. You were not prepared for this one. Let's talk about RF modulation.
Okay.
So when you have a large facility and you have the need to get a single source into multiple displays, how are you going to do that? Walk us through how and what it is and how it works.
Well, let's step back because this is how this industry started legitimately back in the late 70s, early 80s.
Mm-hmm.
We did it with, first off, channel 3 or 4 modulation.
Right.
Which is when, old VCRs, video games, it was all channel 3 or channel 4, and then you had an RF switch that went on the television.
Yep.
Generally a 300 ohm and a 75 ohm jack on it, and you would go between them.
So the only reason I'm laughing is because the only reason I know this is because I used to play on the old Sega Genesis and the Nintendo and everything else, and we had that little switch on there. And the thing is that it's the same technology. It's the same idea. It's modulating it and putting it onto a certain channel.
In the 80s, Channel Vision and Channel Plus started doing modulation. We could pick the channel.
Yeah.
So you could have anything on UHF or VHF. Then you had to put filters if you had other shared channels, particularly from the cable company. Ultimately, the cable company went to a digital format, which stopped the ability to specifically lock out a given channel.
Right.
We had a system called M3B, which was a 1080p RF modulation system.
Yep.
It was fantastic, except when it wasn't.
Yes.
It worked great, the ability to put a source anywhere in the house, to see a television anywhere in the house. You could see it, you could select it. What you could not do was control it.
Right.
It was not a control system, it was merely a video and audio conveyance method.
Right.
4K left us behind on that. We honestly hoped, and I still ultimately do, that we can get a 4K broadcast chip, but it's not there yet.
Right. So now, again, we're going back in time, but we're looking at a very advanced way of doing it because, like Brent's saying, we're still kind of stuck at a 1080p currently on it. They're working on, I mean, there's still technically an SDI connection that you could get up to like a 12 or 18 gig connection on. But again,
yeah, 12.5.
Yeah.
And it doesn't support HDR.
Right.
Doesn't support HDCP 2.2.
Right.
Actually, it didn't support any HDCP. It just kind of skipped it.
Yeah, exactly. So in that case, what you run into with that is that, yeah, you can distribute it that way, but you're going to be having to give up certain things. So maybe in the future we'll see another RF-based system. But let's say that we don't need to worry about a 4K image. Let's say maybe it's a surveillance system or something else like that, and you want to do an RF modulation. Well, you can. You can still do that today. There are systems out there that do RF modulation. You just hook it up to the coax network that's there at the house. You may need to have an RF demodulator. Is that what it's called at the other end instead of doing a channel on a TV?
Well, typically now, when you look at the modulation systems out there, most of them use a European-style modulation, which will not work directly on American television. So it's generally an encode decode. Think of it like an extender, but it's still modulation. You have to have a modulator, then you have to have a tuner.
Right.
The advantage is, again, your coax splitter becomes the matrix.
So let's talk about another thing. Let's say that we have a certain situation set up to where we don't have the resources or the funding to actually put in a matrix. How do you feel about putting a splitter on a switch with multiple splitters on, or reverse that, put a switch on a splitter, or maybe put a splitter on a switch and do a couple things, add a couple extra splitters and add a couple extra switches?
We're going to step back to a phone call you and I both worked on yesterday.
That's where I was going with it.
Not exact in that situation, but every time you add a connection point, every single connection point is signal loss. Every television has a best input, whether it's 1, 2, 3, or 4, depending on the set. There is one input on that TV set that works better than the other 2 or 3 or 4. And you have to look at cumulative failures on HDMI. Generally, it's not one thing that causes the failure. We took a call yesterday. There was multiple sources going into the switch. Then the switch went through a 6-meter cable through a wall and then into a coupler behind the television because they put the TV on a full motion mount into another shorter cable. And the source, the 4K source, would only work on input 5 on the 5-in, 1-out switch. Would not work on any of the other inputs. I had him change the input on the TV, and then it didn't work at all. So as he was back there, it's like, tell me what all you've got. We want to know the entire system, start to finish. Are there jacks? Are there wall plates? Are there couplers? He had an inexpensive Amazon-type HDMI coupler behind the television to extend the length of the cable.
So
that was the culprit. When he pulled that out, everything worked.
now a lot of this is actually kind of interesting because when you look at a coupler in place, a lot of times a lower bandwidth like a 720p, a 1080p,
absolutely.
Even something like a 4K 30 will work perfectly fine with that coupler. But as soon as he tried to do HDR, as soon as he tried to do anything higher than say 10.4 or 10 or 12 gig up to an 18
in this
gig
case,
signal,
anything higher than 1080p.
yeah, exactly. He was running into issues because of that coupler that was in place there.
Yes.
So when we're talking about distribution, we really want to make sure that in the distribution panel or avenue with this, you really want to have less devices. That's why if you don't need to worry about having, if you do need to worry about having multiple devices on multiple TVs and being able to select any of those on that, that's where the matrix is going to come into play. Now, a lot of times the switch is perfectly fine. But if you do need that...
If you have one display.
If you have one display. Now, again, a lot of times a switch or a splitter is perfectly fine to have that in there because that works because you have one source, multiple displays, or one display and multiple sources. The problem is that if you have the need to have multiple sources and multiple displays, do yourself a favor. Less devices in the signal path will ensure that you have the stability for an HDMI connection.
Less is more.
Less is more, very much so.
Now,
Anytime.
Along with that,
yeah.
If you're having an issue, stop. Move to a different input on the television. Try all the TV inputs. It absolutely matters. For those of you that ran track in high school, you will know that the inside lane starts a lot further back than the outside lane. And the reason for that simply is distance traveled. The exact same thing has to happen on an HDMI circuit board. So when you've got multiple inputs going into an HDMI board that's then going into a panel or an AVR or whatever, only one of those inputs typically will be a direct path from the jack to the processor. That's the path you want to select whenever possible, because it will give you, again, we're back to cumulative areas. It will give you less errors. It's generally not one thing. Now, removing one thing can make it work. We were able to determine the problem yesterday was the guy was right at the threshold. So once we know he's at the threshold, we have to figure out what's stepping him over the threshold and what we can do to fix it. If you are in a position where you have to get a little extra length out of a cable, don't buy a coupler. Buy something that's designed to support the bandwidth with minimal loss. And in our case, your best choice would be the AIO2. The AIO2 is a 4 high-speed channel, so it supports 24 gigabits. It also supplements the current and the voltage on all the feeds, which you're going to lose going down the cables. And it's very, very low loss on the entire product.
So like Brent was saying before, when you have the problems with the cumulative issues, what he's talking about, especially with the distances as you go to turn something, you can see here that the green at that point has a longer run than the red line here. But when you have something that's a straight path all the way across, everything has the same amount of distance through that. And it's crazy to think that it's an electrical signal, right? So it's going almost the speed of light. So what does it really matter that it all gets there at a slightly different time? Well, the truth is, and actually, Brent, you and I are going to be having another episode in the future.
The dollar bill.
The dollar bill. We're going to be talking about that as we break down the HDMI cable. But we're going to be talking about the dollar bill issue as you fold it up a couple times in those episodes. But essentially what it comes down to is that the more times that you have a device from the source to the display that can add those errors along the way, if the more devices you have to it, the more errors it's going to add. Every single connection you have there adds error. Now, how large the error is or how small it is will depend on whether or not you get a signal at the other end. So if you have very high quality, very good devices from start to finish, you're probably going to be okay. But again, if you add too many of the highest quality devices, you're still going to have an issue where you lose picture. You may get that picture back if you lower the resolution of the source, and you're going to lose picture if you raise the resolution up to a higher resolution because of the bandwidth requirements. Again, these are all things to keep in mind as you're doing the advanced distributions.
We have seen these problems where somebody used the exact same model of cables between multiple devices. HDMI cables.
Yep.
And what will happen is, it's not uncommon, I don't care who you are and how good you do your work, it is possible that one of the 4 high-speed channels will be twisted slightly different than the other 3. And if you get a lot of cables that have the exact same twist variance, that difference adds up as you add cables.
Exactly.
Simply changing out a series or a different manufacturer or different manufacturing date can make a tremendous difference. One of the advantages we have is DPL certification. And they are very, very, very pushy about all 4 channels reacting the same. So it minimizes the chance of us having that issue in the field.
Right.
DPL certification is a great way to check on that.
So with all that said, that's basically what we're running into with advanced distribution. Now, you can do a lot of really cool things like I was alluding to with the matrices and whatnot. And anytime that you're getting into an area where you may need to have a couple extra connections somewhere else, do yourself a favor, put a matrix in there. Consider our 4x4 HDBaset matrix, consider our 8x8 HDBaset matrix. We also have the matrices that are quick switching. So they don't have the HDBaset portion to it, but when you switch from one source to another, it goes very, very, very quickly. We have those available as well. That's the CS44M and the 88M as well. So definitely check those out. They're great pieces. And again, at any time that you are designing your systems, if you run into an issue or you just want to do a sanity check, as always, give us a call. We're happy to help out with it.
I don't know that we're going to help much on the sanity part.
Well, yeah. Yeah. So anyways, give us a call. Of course, my number here at the office for tech support is 386-492-8584. You can also contact Brent. He is available at 866-839-9187, extension 2203. And he is actually available more than I am. He's here from, Brent, what's your availability?
8 a.m. to 10 p.m., 7 days a week.
7 days a week. And actually, we talked about this last time. The experts is saying that we need a new product, the cable stretcher. We talked about this. So we're working on a cable stretcher. Don't worry.
Okay, now, let's talk about let's
soon.
cover a couple of tech tips, because in the past week, we made a mistake.
Yes, we did.
We designed a product, forgot one of our design features, and it bit us in the butt because we forgot it.
So here's what we learned. We learned that if you have a CSS HDM ABO 3, this is the newest audio breakout that we have. It's an 18 gig audio breakout that retains the audio on the HDMI connection output. It doesn't just strip the audio. However, we were running into issues where with Apple TVs, Roku's, Control 4 EA1s, and a couple other devices, cable boxes, we actually proved this to work out on almost every device. But what this does, what happens is they will have it connected to their display. When they turn off the display and turn the display back on, you lose picture. And the only way to gain picture back is to unplug power and plug power back in. If you have this problem, do us a favor. First thing is to go into the TV and turn off CEC. What happens is that this device has CEC capabilities. The display tells it to turn off, but it never turns it to turn back on. And so then it stays off at that point. So as soon as you turn off CEC, everything should begin to work correctly.
And that was our fault. We specifically designed CEC into it and then forgot it.
Yep. So with that, go ahead. If you are still having troubles with it, of course, give us a call. We're happy to help out with it. Give us a call on tech support. At that point, though, we're going to ask you to please turn off CEC on any device, not just the display. Turn off CEC on your AVR if you have it on the input of an AVR. Turn it off on other devices as well to go ahead and just ensure that we don't have anything else telling the ABO3 to turn off. That's what's happening with that.
One of the things at the very beginning of HDMI we used to preach is select one resolution, only one resolution, never select auto. Turn off CEC, keep your connections to a minimum. Now, the other one that Adam and I have run into is fiber cables on matrices and splitters.
Yes. So
we are seeing a fair amount of this, and Adam takes more calls than I do on it.
Mm-hmm.
We have a solution built into our products for this, so I'm going to hand this one over to Adam.
So the problem that we are seeing at this point is actually across the board with many matrices that are out there. As the matrix is being used with an AOC cable, the AOC, of course, is a fiber optic based cable where the data lines or the TMDS lines are fiber based. Now, because they are fiber-based, they require just a little bit more power. And so what we're seeing across the board is that many matrices out there are not supplying enough power, or the displays are not supplying enough power back to the matrix to power the output in order for the AOCs to work. The symptoms include only one or two outputs on the matrix working at one time. As soon as you disconnect one of them and move it over to another one, those two now begin to work. So keep an eye open for those problems. Our HDMI cables, our AOC cables, including our install bay detachable head shell cables, our new 48 gig AOC cable, and even our older AOC VLOX cables all had power insertion on the head shells. So with those cables, if you're running into similar problems, you can either replace the cable you have and put ours in that has the power insertion on it as well to supplement the power going into the HDMI bus, or at that point, you can also do, for the gentleman that we spoke with before, he actually had our 4x4 matrix, was running into a problem with our original install bay AOC cables that did not have power insertion. And with that, what he did simply was put our AIO2 in place on it, which does the power insertion onto the TMDS line. And from there, it began to work perfectly fine. Now, in his situation, he had a 4 output, so he only used 2 on it because the original 2 worked by themselves. It didn't need the additional power for that. That's basically
one more tech tip
I
got last night. There appears to be an issue. This has nothing to do with us, and we currently don't have a fix for this. But there appears to be an issue with 2020 Samsungs that do not have the One Connect box and the Sonos Arc speaker.
Okay.
Only the 2020 Samsungs, not the 8K with the One Connect box, not the 2019 Samsungs. But the 2020 Samsungs, the new models that are shipping, when used with the Sonos Arc, will randomly drop out. No audio. And apparently the only recourse is to do a power cycle.
So
we are looking into this, but we don't have an answer yet.
So hopefully we'll be able to come up with an answer for it. It may be something as simple as putting our our AIO into place, and maybe that will supplement that, whatever's going on with it. We don't know.
eARC is, I don't think that's going to help the eARC issue.
Sure. So we're looking into possible solutions.
Don't plan on that one, but we are looking into it.
Yep, definitely. So until then, reach out to your reps for your Samsung and your Sonos reps at that point. Let them know that you're seeing it happening so that they can relay that to the tech support teams on their end and the development teams on their end. We feel for all the guys that are in tech support and are in the product development fields in other companies. We fully understand what they're going through. So let them know what's going on so they get more data. More data is the most helpful thing out of all of it. As always, if you are running into problems with any of our stuff, give us a call and reach out to us, and we'll be happy to help you out with that. With that said, Brent, I think that pretty much does it for us today. I do want to say that next week we're going to be doing a video on power management when it comes to an AV system. So we had a great episode with Rob, the electrician, the other week, and it was we're very happy to have him on for that episode. But now we want to talk about power management inside of an AV system like a rack or inside of like a credenza or something else. So check us out next week on Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern time for that episode. And after that...
And I hope to be back.
And you hope to be back. But after that, we actually have a series of episodes coming out that I'm really excited to talk about. This is something that I wanted to do, a total of 6, correct? We have a total of 6 episodes coming out. I'm really excited about it because this is something I wanted to talk about from the very beginning of this series. We're going to be deconstructing an HDMI cable and talking about all of the different pinouts and different wires that are inside of an HDMI cable, what they do, what they carry, why they are set up the way that they're set up, and also what to do when you are troubleshooting and to understand better of what part of the HDMI connection is faulty at that point or what it could possibly be going on with it. So check us out after next week's episode. The week after that, we'll be starting it with episode 1, which is going to be hot plug and 5 volt. So we'll see about that then. So Brent, again, everybody, thank you for watching. Again, if you have any questions or comments or anything else that you'd like to say, oh, good question. Actually, Mike, he's asking about the EHV-HDG2 cables. Reach out to your rep. If I remember correctly, those are the 48 gig cables, Brent. Those are available now, if I understand correctly.
I think.
Okay.
I know that we sold through, I think, 2 runs already.
Okay. Reach out to your rep. Reach out to your distributor to find out availability for it. You can always call us. The best way to actually... you can call us here at Tech Support. We can get you over to the sales team. That's perfectly fine.
Because we don't know.
Honestly, we don't know. We're not. We don't handle the purchasing portion of that. But they can find out for availability for you as well with that. So the news right now is that they should be on their way for more, I'm sure. But just reach out to your rep to find out availability on that. So as always, everybody, thank you for watching the episode with us today. If you have any further questions, feel free to leave them down in the comment section. We do check on those as well. Again, a like, a share, and a subscribe is very helpful to us to let us know that we're doing what we should be doing. Yep.
One more.
Oh, and hit that bell. Hit the bell notification to let you know when we're doing the. Oh yeah, one more subscriber. One more. That's what you were getting at. We need one more subscriber to get to 900. I'm almost certain we're probably there, but we were 1 away from getting it to 900. Where our next goal from there is going to be 1,000. So we'll push on through.
So.
Yep.
We added another thing to our list at the end of the show this week.
Yep. So reboot early, reboot often. Help me out.
Don't cut your wires too short.
Don't cut your wires too short, and turn off CEC.
Turn off CEC. I'm Brent.
I'm Adam.
Have a great day.
We'll see you
next
time.
week.